Hello again, I'm Stephen Jerome, and I'm going to continue reading from the London Year. This is part 105, now at the beginning of a little caper that Terry and Colin have dreamt up to steal Sebastian's face, as it were. The doorbell rang at 4 in the morning. Colin, who had fallen asleep on the couch in the sitting room, was the first to answer. I came awake with a jerk, so I must have been sleeping, although it felt like I hadn't slept at all. Two unshaven men, probably early 40s, but looking older, were coming up the stairs when I opened the door of my room. One was carrying a long roll of plastic with which we were going to carefully wrap each panel before moving it. This would not only protect the work, but hopefully obscure its very recognizable subject once we arrived at Harrods. I led them all the way up to Finn's studio without a word. It was just too early for conversation. The job required all four of us. We removed the panels from the wall, triple wrapped them carefully, maneuvered each one down the narrow flights and around the tight angles of the stairway. Outside there was a work-weary cube truck, double parked and waiting. The roll-up rear door screeched loudly as it opened. The metal floor was gritty with gravel and rust. The roof had a flat skylight clouded yellow with age. The one streetlight above cast no more light into the interior than the moon. Nor was there anywhere to secure the panels vertically. They were too big to sit side by side, lying flat on the floor. There was no alternative than for two men to stand in the back holding them up. Colin and one of the workmen were chosen, as I needed to meet Dermot when we arrived at the loading dock. It wasn't that far of a journey. I caught Colin's eyes as the door came down. It was like we were seeing each other for the last time. London was a different city in the wee hours of the dawn. I was reminded of my long walks with Peter, where what souls one saw were best to avoid. It was a world where only the rats and the rubbish men belonged. The route along King's Road was the same as my usual number 22 bus ride, turning left at Sloane Street, then straight up to Knightsbridge, except this time I directed the driver to go left onto a side street that would put us at the back of Harrods. We arrived just before the designated hour. Dermot was there to meet us, already looking at his watch. He reminded me that Sammy How's Your Ring would be arriving promptly at 6:30. There were already two big lorries backing in. Dermot played tarmac controller with practiced waves, turning us around, guiding the lorry in backwards to the edge of the loading platform. I jumped out of the cab and ran around to raise the roll-up door. When I did, poor Colin was actually sweating, more strained than I'd ever seen him. The four-wheel cart was ready, low and flat, with supporting rails on its long edges. Colin and the guys carried the first panel out of the lorry and set it carefully onto the cart. It stood securely lengthwise, but was too tall and without support, leaned precariously beyond the side rails. Dermot, Colin, and I looked at each other with obvious concern. Suddenly, it was clear that actually getting the artwork upstairs and wheeled through the darkened showrooms, not to mention make it look like business as usual if anyone asked, was a two-man job, and we still had a second panel to load. Also, seeing them in space, as it were, I realized there was also a very good chance that the panels would be too tall to fit through the thick insulated door frame of the deep freeze. I'd never thought to measure. Worse still would be to get them up there and find they didn't fit. There was no time for thinking further, and there'd just be no explaining our misadventure to Sammy. It took only an instant to know that the whole idea was preposterous. In our haste, I hadn't thought it through. Colin caught my dubious expression, to say nothing of Dermot's, whose own job would be on the line in about 20 minutes. "Abort mission?" Colin said. Dermot and I looked at each other and said yes in unison. We scrambled to load the panel back on the lorry. Before the roll-up door rolled down again, Colin told the driver, "Park on Sloane Street." Yes, I thought, now that's a good idea. We needed to stop and rethink immediately. I shook Dermot's hand, saying thank you and sorry, and we pulled out onto the street, at least one disaster averted. Once parked just 2 blocks away, we, including our workmen, stood on the sidewalk coming up with Plan B. If we were going to move the artwork anywhere else, it needed to be properly secured. Padded blankets and straps were required, and a vehicle with hooks or slats or something to which we could secure the piece in transit. The workers told Colin that they had everything back at the garage, but it would cost him. By now they'd caught the smell of fish, saying they didn't want to get stitched up in anything dodgy. They had Colin by the balls and started to squeeze. In the end, he got back into the back of the van and had them drive back to Wandsworth Bridge Road, where he'd left his car. He said he'd work things out from there and call me later at work. I walked back to Harrods, came in through the employee entrance, and went straight up to the staff lounge to catch up on my sleep. Okay, good place to stop there. We'll continue again. Thank you for following along with the London Year.